Today in Minecraft, I'm going to be doing my favorite pastime, which happens to be getting lost in a cave and accomplishing absolutely nothing. And while we do that, I'm going to be reading some of the scariest Reddit stories that I could find. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. The first story today is from r/nosleep from user Saturdead. A beetle only I can see. A couple years ago, I went through a rough patch. I went through a separation with my then fiance after an 8-year relationship. And I was moving to South Dakota for a job opportunity. There were a lot of things breaking down at once, and I didn't have much room to figure out what the hell I was going to do. I was crashing at a college buddy's place for a couple weeks while I was looking for a place of my own. It feels strange to slow down enough to catch a glimpse of your own life. I hadn't taken a vacation in years, and all of a sudden, I had a full month of nothing on my calendar. I took walks, talked to people I hadn't seen in years, rediscovered some of the music I used to listen to. It felt like I was sleepwalking through someone else's life, but I guess that's what it feels like to breathe free after choking yourself for years. It was a strange time in my life, and it would change me in more ways than once. I used to take walks along the river. I just started listening to audiobooks, and I would take the long way back to my buddy's place just to hear more. It's strangely comforting, listening to a story. I guess to a lot of people, it reminds them of childhood. Having a story read to us is one of the most comforting things I can think of. I stopped to tie my shoe when I noticed this acrid smell. I took off my headphones and listened to the river, but there was something else. A weak sort of wheezing, barking noise. Taking a moment to step off the path, I noticed the source, an adolescent deer. It was lying in the river, half its body submerged and the top half weakly patting at the grass as if hoping something would pull it out. It was covered in these nickel-sized holes covering the entire side of its ribcage, and I could see something moving under its skin. It was dying, no doubt about it. I stepped a little closer, just to see what happened to it. The poor thing wasn't long for this world. It didn't look sickly, the wounds seemed physical and inflicted. I'd never seen a parasite able to do that kind of damage. The barks turned to screams, and the screams turned into nothing. After a while, it was just opening its mouth without making a sound. I could see its eyes searching me. It made me believe in a kind of fear I couldn't imagine. All these things, like losing your job or ending a relationship, it's all very human experiences. But what I saw in that animal's eyes reminded me that there was a kind of fear I'd forgotten, a comfort I'd taken for granted. Something was eating it alive. I stepped back as it took its last breath. There was this chill across my body, like I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. The shadows around me grew darker. I could feel something creeping across my skin by looking at this thing. Nickel-sized open wounds, dozens, blood in the water. I walked away with this unsettling sense of dread. I figured I ought to call someone. You can't have a sick, dead animal polluting the waterways, but more so, I didn't know what to think of it. Should I be horrified, scared, thankful to be alive? I got back to the path and put my headphones back on. I let the goosebumps on my back take over as I shuddered, shaking off whatever worries I carried with me. I raised my phone to put my story back on, when I noticed a little gray dot on my thumb. Just this tiny beetle-looking thing. Using my index finger, I flicked it off. But my finger passed straight through, and the little beetle remained. I shook my hands a little and continued on my way, paying no further attention to it. Apart from that, it was a fairly uneventful day. Had a chicken salad, answered some emails, and looked into some apartments. I had a good lead on one, I just needed a little more time. Luckily, time was the one thing I had plenty of. I have very patient friends. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I remember standing in the bathroom looking at myself in the mirror. Maybe my eyes were looking a little darker, and the skin a little loose along the cheeks. They say you never look at yourself the same twice. Age does that to a person. As I leaned down to spit, I felt a tickle on my right hand. Not much, but enough to make me look up. There was that little gray beetle crawling across the palm of my hand. I turned the faucet to medium and ran my hands under it. The beetle was still there. I turned my hand back and forth, up and down, and it didn't move an inch. After a couple of seconds, I was blasting it at max temperature, and the water passed straight through. I could see the beetle with my own eyes, but it's like it wasn't actually there. I put it out of my mind. I still had a story to listen to. I was going to go look at an apartment in the morning. I had things to do, places to be. I couldn't let my mind get preoccupied with little things that didn't matter. I had real problems looming on the horizon, and if I kept staring at my hands, I'd get nowhere. So I went to sleep, trying not to pay attention to what I think was a faint tingle on the palm of my right hand. I'd forgotten all about it the next morning. As I showered and shaved, I noticed a streak of blood across my cheek. Not much, just a tiny red line. I figured I'd accidentally cut myself, but on closer inspection, there was nothing like that. It'd been a perfect shave. Then I looked down at my hand. It was just a tiny little red dot on the back of my thumb, no bigger than the prick of a needle. The teeniest, tiniest little trickle of blood was running out, but it was already coagulating. And at the edge of the wound, a little gray beetle, suckling at it like a gazelle at a waterhole. Now, I've never really had a problem with bugs. I ate a worm as a kid, but that thing was messing with me. I washed my hands 3 times, and it was still there. I used more and more soap. I used a sponge and scrubbed until my skin felt raw. I used dish soap, a weird skin cream I found by the tub, but it did nothing. The beetle was still there, poking at the wound. Finally, I just put a band-aid over the whole thing. It took the beetle a while to figure it out. It tried to dig underneath, but the adhesive from the band-aid was blocking it. With enough effort, it probably could have made it through, but it had an obvious solution to this problem. It moved out of the way and bit me. Now there was another little wound, barely big enough to be seen, but it was there. I figured it just wasn't real. It wasn't reacting to anything, so it couldn't be real. Real things get washed off. Real things get scrubbed. Real beetles get squished and washed down the drain. Real things show up on the screen when you take pictures of it. This didn't. Ergo, this thing couldn't be real. It wasn't possible. Deciding that this was the case, I made myself ready. I put on my nice shirt and pants, got my car keys, and checked the calendar. There was nothing tickling the back of my hand. There was nothing biting me. I had real problems, and this wasn't it. For a couple of hours, I felt nothing. I went around town, checked out an apartment, and had a long talk with my would-be boss about my upcoming move. He was flexible and could give me a couple more weeks, as long as I kept in touch and let him know the second I was available. The whole thing was a done deal, but it's always a bit nerve-wracking when there are papers left to sign. I went to see a guy about an apartment later that day. I got there in my fancy shirt, trying to look the part of confident buyer. I shook his hand and noticed him looking down. There was blood on his finger. He'd accidentally touched one of my wounds. He looked up at me with this one expression of absolute disgust, like I'd spat in his face. He composed himself in the blink of an eye, but for a moment, I could see what he was really thinking. I apologized profusely, and he did as well, but I could tell it really bothered him. All of a sudden, he wasn't thinking about the apartment. He was thinking whether he'd caught something from me or not. He jogged inside to wash his hands, and I knew the whole deal was going to free fall through the floor. There was just no way. I don't think you'd be shocked to hear that I didn't get that apartment. When I got back in my car, I was furious. I could see the beetle on the back of my hand, circling a little pinprick of a wound. I smacked my hand on the dashboard over and over and over, but once I turned my hand back around, the beetle was still there. I brought the hand to my teeth and bit my skin. I spat and scratched and itched, but still nothing. At my worst, I was using my car keys to scratch my skin like a lottery ticket. But all that did was cause more wounds. The beetle didn't seem to mind that. It was an enormous source of frustration. Not only was it bothering me, but it was impacting my actual life. My buddy was asking questions about my apartment hunting, and it just got to me. We ended up agreeing that I could stay the full week, then I'd go stay at a motel. It all sounded very congenial and cordial, but I could tell he was just done with me. That's how a lot of things in my life ended, with cordial smiles, tilted heads, and practiced lines. My 8-year relationship had died the same way. No screaming or crying, just a well-timed "we need to talk" in a public place, as to not cause a scene. But this damn beetle was driving me mad. I couldn't take photos of it, so I tried to draw it. I tried to get a better look using a magnifying glass, but I'm a terrible artist. Still, I got a good enough look that I could recognize it from a photo. I scrolled through hours of images looking to see if I could find that one particular beetle. I never found a perfect match, but I think the closest description would be a sort of stubby, darkling beetle with a light gray exoskeleton and short legs. All the while, it was chewing away on the back of my hand, and I could feel every tickle of its legs as it moved from one wound to another, poking at the scabs. Going to bed that night, I could feel the heat from my hand. Not from the beetle, but from the way I'd scratched and itched at it. It looked swollen, even from a distance. I probably had to get it checked out if it progressed. But that line of thinking drew me down a path I didn't like. Laying down to sleep, I could still see the eyes of that deer. Those blank dark spheres, looking not at me, but the concept of me. Not knowing if I was a savior or a predator. Maybe it figured out I was neither. Maybe those barking noises were a warning to stay away, to turn around and run. I never really fell asleep, but I shot out of bed like I'd been kicked. I felt a bite, this time further up my wrist. Turning on the lights, I could see the beetle had grown larger. Not by much, maybe 1/6 of an inch. There was a slightly bigger bite further up my hand. It itched, already turning red. I was done with this thing. I was absolutely, unequivocally done. I would kill it, even if it meant chopping my own damn hand off. I'd had enough. I pulled out some ice from the freezer and dumped it in a bucket. I filled it with water. As I did, my friend walked out of his bedroom, hair still messy and a sleep mask tucked away on his brow. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm almost done." "Okay, but what are you doing?" I sighed and bit my lip. There was no way of getting around it. I was gonna have to look like a madman. I turned to him and showed him my hand. "You see this?" "Yeah." "What do you see?" He looked a little closer. There was no way he wouldn't see the beetle. The damn thing was front and center. "Looks like a rash. You okay?" "It's not a rash, not a scratch. I don't know what the hell it is. You should get that checked out." I rolled my eyes as he lumbered back to his bedroom. I shoved my hand down the icy bucket, only to watch the beetle casually travel up my arm, find a warm spot, and bite down again. This time, I felt it. Over the next few days, the beetle was always on my mind. Everything else became this background noise to this immediate thing I could see on the back of my hand. I would get these specks of blood on my shirt, right by my wrist, and I would absolutely lose my mind with anger. At one point, I noticed it didn't seem to bite at wounds that were covered in something, so I rolled my entire hand in duct tape. The damn thing just crawled up my arm, found another spot, and bit me again. I tried everything. I bought pesticides from a garden shop. I used some stuff used to clean pools. I tried to cut off the blood flow with a belt, but ended up hurting myself. No matter what, the beetle had a solution. It would walk somewhere else, bite down, and keep eating. After a couple of days, it was big enough to cover the nail on my pinky finger. The same day I moved out of my friend's place and into a motel, I went to see a doctor. I didn't even bother telling him about the beetle. I just showed him the wounds on my arm. He ended up giving me a prescription for some kind of eczema medication and encouraged me to eat more fiber. But there was little else he could do. All test results came back negative. He recommended some generic antifungal cream, but I would have to wait until the wounds scabbed. I would get these bouts of rage. I could be going along normally and then feel that twitch of pain, and I would lose my mind. I'd slam my hand against the wall or beat my arm like a drum. I ended up with a whole bunch of bruises and cuts, and I was nowhere near closer to getting rid of that damn thing. It would keep me up at night. I could feel it crawling around, looking for places where the skin was soft and thin. And this one time, as it bit down in the pit of my elbow, I made this ugly grunting noise. My mind circled back to the ugly grunting of that dying deer. Perhaps it too had looked for a solution. Maybe until that last moment, it had tried to wash them off by throwing itself in the river. Was that going to be my fate? Dying from some self-inflicted nonsense while this thing ate me from the inside? It was hard to stay focused. I was barely getting more than 2 to 3 hours of sleep a night, and I found myself nodding off in my car. I'd moved into a motel down by the highway, but the Wi-Fi was spotty and I had trouble finding a new place to live. I could spend hours at the computer and still be no closer to a solution. All the while, my savings were bleeding out, and my would-be boss was asking questions I couldn't answer. I had this one constant tab open where, every now and then, I'd look into whatever long shot I could imagine to get this thing off me. Poison, radiation, X-rays, sound waves, there were a lot of ideas. The problem was, without knowing exactly what it was, there was no way to say what would work, and what wouldn't. But I couldn't show it to anyone, and describing it just made it sound like a sort of gray beetle. Then I had an idea. It was nasty, but it just might work. I had this cigar cutter from a friend's wedding the year prior. I hadn't thrown it away, but never really found a use for it either. I'm not much of a cigar guy, but it's kinda cool to keep something that looks like a guillotine in my pocket. I noticed that if I poked myself with a needle, I could sometimes get the beetle to move. It would always go towards the freshest wound, so little by little, I tricked it to go to the tippy top of my ring finger. I set the skin at the tip of my finger at the edge of the cigar cutter and slammed down. It's not as dramatic as it sounds. It burned. We're talking about a small patch of skin at the tip of my finger. The beetle tumbled off, rolling onto the floor. I backed away, holding my bleeding finger up triumphantly. Then it flew towards me. Turns out, this thing had wings. I tried to smack it away, but it passed through my hand. I tried running, but it passed through the door. I got in my car and drove, and it slowly came crawling from the dashboard right back onto my hand, still bleeding from the top of my finger. As it bit a nerve, I pulled over. I was in the middle of nowhere by then, and I just stood there screaming for a solid minute. My voice must have echoed for miles. I drove around, going numb from the pain. If all this effort was all I could do to slow it down a little, I was going to wear myself out. There had to be something else I could do. Anything. I experimented with a couple of things for a few days. Changing my diet, for one. I figured if this thing lived off of me, maybe changing what I ate could kill it. I tried a bunch of weird combinations, but nothing seemed to work. If anything, eating more fiber like the doctor ordered seemed to make it more active. A couple of days passed. The beetle was growing. It could easily cover the nail on my ring finger. I could feel the individual legs and the round mouth moving in and out as it bore into my flesh. The wounds had started to look like what I'd seen on that deer, round and cavernous. When you don't sleep, the days start to blend together. I would forget to answer emails and phone calls. Instead, I'd just sit in my motel room, hoping housekeeping would come by to change the blood-stained sheets. I'd begun wrapping my arm in a towel at night, but the wounds were getting big enough for the blood to soak right through. I was tired, exhausted, really, and it was starting to show. Looking in the mirror really felt like looking at a different person. I stopped answering when my would-be boss called. I stopped asking when friends and family called. When I started getting texts, I just shut the phone off completely. They weren't helping, and they wouldn't understand. How could they? I tried to get a video of the beetle biting me so you could see the wounds opening. It took a few hours, but I got it eventually. It looked sort of weird, but not like a bite in the video. It looked more like the skin was just contracting and releasing. Less like a bite, and more like I took a big breath, and something broke on the exhale. It didn't really show anything. I considered getting a microscope or some kind of macro lens, but what was the point? I had tried everything. Electricity, pepper spray, fire, acid. I considered that maybe I could cut my finger off high up in the air, but the damn thing could fly. It was too fast, too. It wouldn't work. I made a long list of possible ideas, and one by one, I crossed them all off. All the while, I would feel something stinging my arm, and this ceaseless frustration would well up in my chest with nowhere to go. The truth of the matter was, this thing wasn't leaving. It was going to eat, and grow, and eat, and grow. It didn't matter what I did, and it wouldn't matter what I tried. I made list after list after list, and it was all just a monumental dead end. As I panicked and cried and scratched, it just sat there, quietly eating away at my skin. People must have thought I'd been in an accident. Some of the wounds had gotten bad enough that I needed bandages. The guy at the drugstore started to recognize me. I remember booting up my phone to check a video I'd made, only to get caught in a call with my would-be boss. I had about a dozen missed calls from him by then. On a whim, I answered. "Hey," he said, "glad to reach you. We were getting worried." Yeah, sorry, I said, my voice hoarse. I've come down with something bad. You're sick? Yeah, it's been pretty bad. I held my hand up, watching the beetle scurry over the bandages, looking for its next spot. We've been waiting to hear from you, he continued. We weren't sure you'd be coming. I'm not so sure either. Sorry? It had just slipped out, but I couldn't help myself. The beetle bit down, sending another jolt of pain up my arm. I shuddered. It was big as the nail on my thumb by now. Not that it mattered. It was a pain when it was small. It was gonna be a pain when it grew bigger. I've been dealing with something, I said. I don't think I'm getting better anytime soon. It's that serious? I don't know. Maybe. The beetle suckled at the wound, perching its legs on the sides for balance. Not that shaking it off was ever an option. You don't know if it's serious? I suppose it is. I yawned. I couldn't help it. I was exhausted. I turned my hand back and forth, watching the beetle hang on like it was nothing. I'm gonna be real, he said. We were expecting you days ago. This doesn't look good. I might be dying. You might be? How can you not know? I don't know. It's been eating me for weeks. I was referring to the situation as a whole, but looking at the beetle, I realized it was astoundingly literal. Eating me for weeks. It wasn't meant to be a pun, but the moment I realized it was, I burst into a laugh. This loud, belly-bursting, manic laughter. I don't know at what point my would-be boss hung up, but I didn't care. I was laughing until I ran out of breath and tears rained down my cheeks. The laughter turned to a wailing cry as I rolled around on the floor like a toddler. I ended up lying there for hours, watching the beetle take one bite after another after another. It was sort of hypnotic, and after a while, you dissociate enough to not feel the pain. That's not your hand you're looking at. It's his. After that point, I didn't really care anymore. I stayed in my motel room, watching the beetle wander up and down my arm, looking for weak spots. It was sort of beautiful in the right light. Not really light gray, but more of a pale asphalt blue. Sort of like the novelty sunflowers they sold at the garden shop. I would lounge around, waiting for a genius idea to spring into mind. I'd keep my headphones on and walk for miles, forgetting to put something on to listen to. I just didn't want to hear my own grunts of pain when the beetle bit me. It had stopped growing bigger, instead growing longer, segmented. It was almost as big as my thumb. I didn't care, but the bites were getting harder to ignore. I got into this daily routine of cleaning my wounds, taking iron supplements, covering my body in bulky clothes. Thankfully, the motel room was cheap. At night, in lieu of sleeping, I would bounce between impotent rage and desperate crying. I would feel so sorry for myself, listing all the things I wanted to do if I could just get this damn thing off of me. All the while, it would just bite, chew, swallow, repeat. Lying on the floor, I remember waking up from a strange rhythmic sound. I couldn't figure out where it came from. I turned on the lights and realized I was shaking. The sound had been coming from me, tapping the floor. I rushed to the bathroom. My mind was racing 100 ways at once, but they all funneled into this one contracting idea. I was dying. I saw my black eyes in the bathroom mirror, and it was like staring that deer in the face all over again. It had known it was dying. Now I knew too. The pain got progressively worse. I started getting these big round wounds just inches apart, some bigger, some smaller, some with long strips of skin missing at the edge. If I tried to cover the beetle with my left hand, it had grown big enough that I could see the tip of its carapace peeking out the back of my hand. It looked so physical, but everything still passed straight through it. I hadn't even realized I'd given up. It just dawned on me that I had no ideas and nowhere left to go. I could go back to the doctor and get my wounds treated, but would it matter? Sooner or later, there'd be too many. I could prolong it, but to what end? Would I grow desperate enough to throw myself in a river too? I started listening to my audiobook again. I walked around for so long that I forgot how many hours passed. I wouldn't even notice the shivers coming and going. It was just nice to finish something. At the end of one of those walks, I remember sitting down on a park bench. At this point, I could feel every bite of the beetle. It was so frequent that it looked like I had the hiccups, sending my entire body into a spasm. I put on my headphones and dialed a number I hadn't touched for some time. My ex-fiancée. We hadn't talked for weeks, despite promising to be friends after an emotional breakup. It didn't take her long to pick up. She waited for me to speak first. Hey. Hey, you. You doing okay? Not bad, you? I looked down on my hand, watching the segmented creature scuttle around, finding the perfect angle to eat. I know we've talked about this, I said, ignoring the question. But why did we go this way? What do you mean? It was 8 years. We weren't getting anywhere. With your job and my classes, we keep, circling the same drain, year in, year out. I nodded. I'd heard the same argument and even felt the same thing. It just seemed like a really long time ago. Is that such a big deal, though? I asked. Jobs, classes, yeah, it matters, but for how long? Until I retire? That's a long way off. Yeah, but that's coming too. Jobs end, classes end, but we could still be around. She paused for a moment, letting out a sigh. I don't think we can. I nodded. We sat there for a moment, letting the silence stretch the distance between us a little further. I gave up after that point. I bought a whole bunch of gooseberries and just sat in the motel room, eating them like it was a job. They're rich in fiber and one of my favorite berries. Given the way this thing had reacted to me eating more fiber, I figured I might as well make a good meal. I was coming to the realization that I wasn't going to be okay. My arm looked like a minefield, and a couple of wounds were all the way down my shoulder blade. The thing scurried so fast from one point to another that I had trouble keeping track. If it wanted a particular spot, it would sometimes flutter from one point to another in a soundless burst of clattering wings. The fibers really kicked things into high gear. The thing got ravenous. I thought it was just a strange quirk at first, but it completely changed the way it behaved. It stopped taking the occasional bite and started digging down in a frenzy, not moving from one spot to another, instead focusing on this one particular hole in my shoulder, straight through the nerve and tissue and muscle, to the point where the pain was so bad I couldn't focus. I ended up on the floor of my motel room, screaming and bleeding all over the carpet. The pain had been manageable when it was just the occasional bite, but now it wasn't stopping. It was eating and growing so fast that I could physically see it. Someone called the cops. I have this vague memory of a door opening and someone screaming at me. Meanwhile, I'm seeing this creature the size of my hand scurrying back and forth over me, biting down and tossing its body around like a predatory death roll. Someone was shouting, "We need an ambulance." The creature was literally foaming at the mouth, some kind of anticoagulant. My wounds weren't closing, and I could feel this strange cold enter my bloodstream. Colors looked different, sharper, sort of. The pain slipped from me, not like an anesthetic, but more like I just forgot what pain was supposed to feel like. It left me feeling empty and callous, like there was nothing left that could touch me. The only problem was I couldn't move. Someone put on gloves and dragged me out. Someone else was trying to cover my wounds in bandage and gauze. There were flashing lights and raised voices. Meanwhile, this thing was taking bites out of me in front of my eyes, tearing up the skin for all to see. There was this one policeman trying to drag me out that dropped me the moment he saw a new wound burst open. I can't imagine what he must have thought I had. Meanwhile, I was nodding in and out of consciousness. Voices started to sound different. The sky looked strange. I was splayed out on a gurney, and it felt like I was already dead. During the ambulance ride, the creature settled on my stomach, tearing holes out of me. It curled up like a lapdog, now large enough to cover my entire arm. It wouldn't stop eating. The bites felt like nothing but distant pinches, but I saw the volume of meat disappearing into its maw. I looked one of the paramedics in the eye and realized I was making a sound. With every bite, I was making this reactionary noise, like a bark. I must have looked at them the same way that deer looked at me, by the river. For the first time in a long time, I could see something of myself in another. More so than looking in the river, we were both scared to death. I tried to speak, but the words didn't come out right. I tried to breathe, but the signals didn't reach my lungs. I was collapsing, shutting down. Little lights in the palace of my mind going out, one by one, as bite after bite took away some semblance of self. I was dying, and I could barely feel it, but a part of you just knows. I don't know where my conscious thoughts ended and something else began, but I remember swirling colors and strange voices. Bright lights passed by, maybe street lights? A sky with strange moons, and people talking in unusual languages. Somewhere in the haze of expressions, little undercurrents of things I never got to experience, things I didn't know I missed. Eating ice cream, having a fragrant bath. Then, one bite struck a nerve on my neck, and I passed out. There are little flashes of life here and there, like a light swinging back and forth in my mind. In one moment, I'm being rolled into the emergency room. Then, someone holding up my hand, looking for a pulse. And that thing, the beetle, curled up on my lap in a spiral. Had it stopped eating? The next time I opened my eyes, it was dark. There were machines and wires and cables. The thing resting on my stomach looked different. It had curled into a ball, the head and tail sort of fused together. It was lying still, slowly bobbing up and down with the rhythm of my shallow breathing. No pain, no biting. I lay there looking up into the ceiling. The colors had faded. There was just this tingle in my eyes that, if I looked a little closer, I could almost see the stars in the ceiling. Maybe it was just random neurons firing randomly to keep my senses alive, but to me, it just looked like silver sparkles, and I was glad to see them dance. It felt like the blink of an eye, but then it was morning. People walking in and out to check on me. Someone had opened the blinds on the window. The creature looked different, as a light blue mold had crept over it. Then it cracked open. I saw movement, little things making their way out of the creature that had been eating me, breaking it apart like a cocoon. At first, it looked like a sort of mantis, until I noticed the wings. They unfurled, stretching out one by one and testing their tensile strength. There were about 7 of them in total. Just these little red, white, and black things covered in gray hairs. Butterflies. They didn't stay long. They polished themselves off and took to the sky, passing straight through the window pane and into the world beyond. In the days to come, the doctors looked for answers. Someone thought I'd gotten a flesh-eating bacterium, but it didn't follow any known symptoms. Once it was clear that whatever it was had gotten flushed out of my system, they focused on my recovery instead. I think in a strange way, giving up accidentally saved me. If I hadn't started eating more fiber, that thing would have killed me, just from the wounds. By accelerating the process, it got what it needed before it killed me. By the time I left the hospital, I had a journal full of question marks and a body full of scars. I was scheduled for a follow-up, but it was just to check on the wounds. There was nothing they could do to make sure this whole ordeal didn't happen again because they had no idea what it was to begin with. Looking back at it now, I feel like I should be angry. Like I should be cursing God for making something I can't understand that tormented me in such a cruel way. I know I should feel like that, but at the end of the day, I'm just happy to be here. I can acknowledge that shitty things happen and still be thankful that I get to enjoy the things I've taken for granted. It's helped me look past the calls and the emails and the diplomas. There were other jobs out there and other loves. I can't say my life is perfect today, but it didn't end with one turbulent upheaval. Not from a move or a breakup or a beetle. Life goes on, and sometimes that's enough. And sometimes on my way home, I take the long route. I put on an audiobook, and if I look closely into the distant fields, I can see something fluttering from one bush to the other, biting into meaty red berries and suckling the juice. Little gray butterflies with red, white, and black wings that only I can see. Well, guys, I had no idea that the OP was going to survive this one. In my mind, I was thinking, yeah, no, they're cooked for sure. But I seriously can't believe that eat more fiber was the cure to this whole experience. Anyways, huge props to Saturdead. I've read probably 5 to 8 of their stories, and they're all so good. Anyways, let's get on with the next one. The next one today is also from r/NoSleep from user Unalloyed Saint Trina. There's a predator only the deaf can hear approaching. They've taken everything from me. Henry and I were born 6 weeks early. Mom says we came out looking like a pair of grapes. Our lips and skin were dyed a dull bluish purple, and she could almost fit both of us in the palm of her hand. It's an outrageously gentle way of describing 2 premature babies in the process of suffocating, but I guess that's Mom for you. Put more bluntly, Henry and I were born on death's door. We couldn't breathe, not on our own. not with the equipment that God loaned us. Machines were tasked with breathing for us in the neonatal ICU. Tubes as thin as coffee straws pumped microscopic gulps of fresh air down our throats, offloading our immature lungs, giving them space to rest and develop. For a little while, it seemed like the worst was over, seemed like we both would live, seemed like we'd both be normal. Then I bled into my brain. The vessels were too young, too fragile. One of them snapped. Blood pooled quickly, crushing whole sections of my brain against the inside of my skull. The surgeons told Mom I had a 50% chance of survival, but I'd most certainly be damaged goods if I did pull through. When our tempers flare, Henry likes to speculate. He thinks that if I hadn't survived, Dad may have decided to stick around. Maybe he wouldn't have gotten so overwhelmed. Perhaps he could have stomached the burden of a single, normal kid. Forces me to remind him that Dad bolted for the border the day we were born, a full week before my brain bled. He sprinted from the delivery room at the mere sight of us, his grape-skinned, breathless keychain babies. That said, cerebral palsy and deafness aren't the worst cards I could have been dealt. So what if my ears don't work? So what if my muscles aren't perfect? It is what it is. If we're to blame for Dad's abandonment, then so be it, but I won't shoulder the blame alone. I mean, that's what twins do, right? We split the world down the middle and share it equally, including the shitty parts, especially the shitty parts. Anyway, last week, for the first time in 15 years, I heard something. I heard them, digging through the earth, burrowing towards the surface, coming to hollow us out. 48 hours before they arrived. My eyes shot open. There was a strange pressure in my skull, a thrumming beneath my temples. Terror chewed through my chest. I launched myself from bed, strapped on my arm braces, and scrambled into the hallway to pound on Grandpa's door. Mom would come running at the slightest noise, but Grandpa slept like a corpse. The drive to the ER was torture. I had no idea what was happening inside my skull. I assumed my brain was bleeding. That murderous vessel was dead set on finishing the job. Henry bitched in the waiting room for hours because Mom wouldn't let him stay home alone. He was convinced the sensation was psychological, kept repeating the phrase, "It's just another Felix freakout." My brother didn't just say it either. He said it and signed it. Could have spared me the heartache by just whispering it when my head was turned, but no, he had to twist the knife. It hurt even more when it started to seem like Henry was right. My physical exam was unremarkable. My blood work was fine. The CT scan didn't show any blood sloshing around in my brain. The doctor's best guess, sinus infection. A freaking sinus infection. Listen, I don't blame that doctor. She was nice and she tried. The idea that I could be hearing again would have been an outlandish hypothesis. Wasn't like I was much help either. I had no experience with noise. I mean, I understood it conceptually. I knew the words. Screech, thud, buzz, boom, thump. But that's all they were to me. Words. Names of famous celebrities whose faces I'd never seen. Touch felt like a cousin to sound, so I pictured hearing was like having a set of big, invisible fingertips. Maybe a shrill noise feels like touching a hot stove. Maybe a soft noise is like running my fingers over a clean silk pillowcase. And what did this noise feel like? This thrumming below my temples. Well, I was rummaging through the attic last year, digging through winter clothes, hunting for a lost sweater, when I finally found it and held it up. Something shifted near the collar. A massive black cockroach leapt out from the inside of that sweater. It landed on my cheek and skittered down the side of my neck before falling to the floor and disappearing into the shadows. Chaotic, impulsive, unpredictable, restless, and willing to eat anything. Exactly like a cockroach. That's what it felt like. 10 hours before they arrived. Henry shoved a forkful of roast beef into his mouth before he started complaining to Mom. Talking and chewing at the same time made it difficult for me to read his lips. It was all too sloppy. Henry loved pretending like he'd forgotten that fact. I didn't catch everything he said. Why coddling him? You care of him forever. Not my job, protect him. If you're going to talk about him, in front of him, you damn well better have the respect to let him know what you're saying, Henry, my mom signed. Her hands moved forcefully, as if an evaluator was hiding somewhere in the room, covertly grading her clarity and technique. One of her chipped gel nails flew across the room as she signed the word respect. Shame writhed like a serpent stuck in my gut. I looked at Grandpa. He was scooping his fork over the table, trying to wrestle some meat, missing the plate again and again. My mom's anxious eyes caught me looking to him for comfort. Sometimes it felt like she couldn't stop watching me, even if she wanted to. "Phil!" "Huh?" he replied, still focused on fishing some dinner from his plate. "Your glasses?" Grandpa furrowed his brow. Then there was a burst of recognition. A eureka moment. I could practically see the dusty light bulb flicker dimly above his head. "Oh, right. A pair of thick glasses rested on his sternum, hanging from his neck via a gold chain. Mom made sure he was always wearing the necklace, but he would often take off the glasses and forget they were there anyway. He patted his shirt until his hand stumbled upon the glasses, then slid them on. His face broke into a warm, genuine smile, finally able to see us. "How was your day, Grandpa?" I signed. "Pretty good. Another beautiful afternoon to be delivering mail. Just between us, I think Miss Hudson has the hots for me. Don't tattle to her husband, though, all right?" he signed back. He blew imaginary smoke from a pair of finger guns and winked at me. I forced a grin and nodded. Henry's face contorted into a scowl, gaze fixed on his mashed potatoes, stirring them harshly. Grandpa was long retired. He hadn't delivered mail in years. Age had taken a toll on his mind. His memory had become like the weather, clear one day, cloudy the next, and the forecast could change on a dime. Despite his senility, the 76-year-old was remarkably spry, lean, and energetic. On good days, I was happy to know that at least his body was still intact. But on shittier days, his situation just tasted like a bitter irony. He had beautifully maintained machinery, but he wasn't always behind the wheel. I was beyond grateful that his ASL remained intact, but perhaps, more than anything else, I feared the inevitable day that would no longer be the case. I smeared a mushy tuft of steamed broccoli onto my fork. My hand abruptly went from steady to trembling. All day, the pressure had been sharpening, accelerating, intensifying. I looked around the dinner table. Nobody else appeared to notice. All the tests were normal. It was my sinuses. It had to be my sinuses. Try as I might, I couldn't buy my own story, and Mom could smell the panic burning beneath my skin. "Are you okay? How's your head?" she sighed. I pointed a half-hearted thumbs up in her direction. How could I burden her with the truth? Hadn't she suffered enough at the hands of my dysfunction for one lifetime? "See, he's fine. He's strong. Quit worrying," Henry signed. I suppressed the urge to smile. When I looked back at my plate, I realized Grandpa wasn't eating. He was staring absent-mindedly at the floor, head turned towards me. His glasses had slipped into his baggy t-shirt, tenting the fabric at his chest. He was muttering to himself. I couldn't make out most of the words, and what I did catch made no sense. Dirty little, squishing around, tangled. Disgusting, tiny, tangled strings. I did catch one phrase for certain. It was the last thing he muttered before becoming silent. "I see you." 30 seconds before they arrived. As we drove through town, the cryptic pressure in my head burst unexpectedly. Reminded me of popping an inflamed zit. There was a blip of pain, yes, but it was followed by a rush of blissful relief. I turned to Henry. He had his head leaning against the window, jaw stiff, shoulders tense to his ears. Guess I had a big, doofy smile on my face because he shot back a mocking look. Tongue out, eyes crossed. I imagine he would have flipped me the bird if we weren't in the car with Mom. He was livid. We were an hour late for his soccer game. Both Grandpa and I can be tricky to mobilize. Did we take our meds? Do we have our necessary outside-the-house gear? Plus, we just move slow. It's a miracle if we're only 15 minutes late for any given appointment. I wasn't the issue that morning, though. I knew better than to be unprepared on game day. Nothing aggravates Henry more. No, there was something wrong with Grandpa. Mom told me he was feeling under the weather. He didn't look sick, though. He looked vacant. Not his usual diet dementia aloofness, either. He looked like his soul had departed his body. His glasses had gone missing, too. And he was still muttering nonsense under his breath. Our beat-up sedan lurched to a clunky stop at a red light. I racked my brain, coming up with ways I could support Henry. I could make sure he stays hydrated. The light turned green. Our car wobbled forward. Or maybe I'd give him permission to lie to his teammates. Henry could tell them he was late on my account. That'd be bad for me in short term, but it'd probably be easier for him to explain than whatever the hell was going on with Grandpa. We came to a sudden, jagged halt. Old coffee cups flew from their cup holders, drenching the dashboard in stagnant brown liquid as the soggy cardboard fell apart. My seatbelt became rigid, biting into my chest to keep me in place. My woozy heart thundered into the back of my throat. We'd stopped at the end of a narrow, one-way street hemmed in by two monolithic brick buildings. The right bumper was tilted down and the tire was stuck. Mom turned and signed, "Stay." She stepped out to check the damage. My body trembled, nearly convulsing from the surprise of it all. Henry grabbed my hand. He dragged his thumb along the underside of my wrist, slow and steady. I felt myself becoming grounded. Outside, Mom was staring at the hood, scratching the back of her head. She peered through the window and gestured. "Pothole or sinkhole? Can't tell. It's very deep. Stay in the car. I'm calling the police." My breathing became ragged. A deluge of adrenaline flooded through my veins. The pressure hadn't left me. Suddenly, it was coming back, and it was coming back different. When Henry and I were young, before he was fed up with my existence, before he saw me as this loathsome, pitiable burden, we loved the arcade. It was a place where we were equal, despite my brokenness. Every afternoon, we would scour the house for quarters, hoping against hope we would find a cache of loose change between some couch cushions or in a pair of Grandpa's pants. If we were successful, we'd celebrate by shaking handfuls of coins in the air, making our closed fists rattle like Macarenas. The pressure was like that, rapid, rhythmic clinking. And God, it was pressing in on me from every direction. Grandpa leapt from the passenger seat and onto the sidewalk. He twisted around in manic circles, batting at the empty air around his legs, saliva dripping down the corner of his mouth, repeating the same word so violently that even I could tell what he was saying. Worms, worms, worms. Henry dug his nails into my flesh. Mom dropped the phone from her ear. She stood by the bumper, dumbstruck, panic setting in thick. Her head kept darting between the car and Grandpa. I didn't understand. I pointed wildly towards Grandpa, desperate to focus her attention. In his frenzy, he was getting closer and closer to the end of the one-way. He was going to spill out onto the busy road, and then, who knows? The man was basically blind without his glasses. Why, God, why wasn't she running to save him? Henry yanked my arm, trying to pull me towards him. I spun to look at him. His face was drained of color, paler than fog. His eyes were bulging from their sockets. Never in my life had I seen my brother more petrified, and he wasn't looking out at the front of the car. He was staring at something right outside my window. The clinking noise was deafening. It filled my broken ears and left room for nothing else. I couldn't hear the slack-jawed, dead-eyed man silently slamming his limp arms against the glass, one after the other. An endless, hypnotic barrage. And the glass was starting to splinter. I couldn't move. It wasn't just terror that rooted me to the seat. I was mesmerized by the vibrations under his skin. The flesh expanded. Spaghetti-thick cords would rise across every inch of his body. There was no order to their arrangement. They weren't stationed in parallel or in a neat cross-stitch. They were a chaotic, tangled mess. A second later, the cords retracted and his skin appeared normal. Expand, clink. He threw his flaccid arm over his shoulder. Retract, clink. It fell like a meteor, helpless to gravity, and shattered the window. A hailstorm of glass engulfed me. He moved to lean his head into the car. Mom bounded into view and tackled him at the waist. The clinking ceased. The world was silent once more. I gripped the edge of the broken window and threw my head out. Glass dug into my palms, but I barely felt any pain. I needed to see that Mom was okay. Relief surged out of me in a single, shaky breath. She was kneeling on the narrow sidewalk, stunned, trembling, but intact. What was left of the man lay in front of her. He wasn't dead. Dead isn't the right word. The man shattered like a ceramic pot. The collision had tossed him into the brick wall of the nearby building, and the impact had broken him into two large pieces, one from the chest up, the other from the waist down. Dozens of other smaller pieces were scattered around him, thin, rattling shards of dry human pottery. He was empty on the inside. No guts, no blood, no heart, nothing at all. The worms had hollowed him out. Mom turned, looked me in the eyes, and shot me a weak, world-weary smile. Somehow she knew, if she stayed still, she could buy us time. She could make damn sure we got away. Her hands reached up to a sign. The man's shattered body seized. The clinking resumed with a hellish ferocity. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them. I could track their movements, getting closer and closer and closer to my mom. Henry was behind me, reaching over my shoulder, stretching his hand out to pull her in, to keep her safe. I pushed him back. The clinking was upon her. She screamed, I think. Her mouth grew wide, her jaw became slack. They were infiltrating her, hollowing her body until there was nothing left. Enough of her lingered to sign 6 final words. Take care of your brother, Felix. Her fingers contorted into a bevy of unnatural, inhuman shapes. Her body went limp. Then she began to pulse. Expand, clink. Retract, clink. For maybe the first time in our lives, Henry followed my lead. I shoved him out of the far door. He put his arm around me, and we left. I don't know for sure that Grandpa's dead, but I hope he is. Because if his heart's still beating, that means he's either alone, scared and confused, or hollowed out and somehow still alive. For now, it seems like we're safe. I was able to guide us out of town, avoiding the worms like landmines. They seem to cluster together and wait for victims, hiding in plain sight, but the only time they stop moving appears to be right before they leave or enter a host. Otherwise, they're always moving, which means I can hear them. Everyone's gone. The entire town is empty. We passed by hundreds of tire-sized holes in the ground. I threw a quarter down one of them. Henry said he never heard it hit the bottom. I think the hollowed out slid down those holes. Don't know where else they would have gone. I don't know why they've awakened from their dormancy deep within the earth, but I suppose it doesn't matter. They're here now. These things are a living paradox. Only the blind can see them. Only the deaf can hear them. Nests of them writhed across my town streets, through layers of salt deposited for a snowfall that never came. They clinked up a storm, twisting and squirming and tangling in on themselves, but the salt never shifted. Indirect detection doesn't seem like a viable strategy. Want my advice? Hold your differently abled neighbors near and dear. Don't have any? That's all right. From my perspective, you have 2 options. You could roll the dice. Maybe this isn't the beginning of some sort of worldwide annexation of the human race. Maybe my town was just very unlucky. But if you'd like to err on the safe side, might I recommend a screwdriver? I mean, most people have a screwdriver. A screwdriver should be able to do the trick, no matter which way you take it. Blind or deaf, dealer's choice. And if the broken are the only ones truly equipped to survive this, sooner or later, we may have to shift our perspective on what it means to be broken. Okay, everybody, go call up a deaf or a blind friend right now, and, just make sure you're on good terms. All jokes aside, that was some great writing. Huge shout out to Unalloyed Saint Trina for once again letting me read one of their amazing stories. Anyways, that's all I had for you today. If you liked today's video, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe, as it does help me out greatly. And also, huge shout out to my channel members. Thank you so much for your continued support on the channel. If you guys do want to further support the channel, that link is going to be down in the description. However, it is not at all required, completely optional. And with that said, I will see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.